So today we have Gillian and Megan here with us to talk about a group that they have dealing with climate grief. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. They're going to explain it. It's really interesting the way that they've brought this together. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. So Gillian and Megan, if you guys want to go ahead and start, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you everybody for being here. We really appreciate your time today. So I'm going to start screen sharing. Ooh. All right. So my name is Gillian Cromwell. I am the Vice President of Green Bellevue. I serve on the board, and I'm also just kind of generally an activist in town. And this is my partner in the Climate Exchange, Megan Smith-Sallans.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm a psychotherapist here in Omaha. I've been in private practice for close to 20 years now. I have a real passion for bringing in what is happening with the climate into my practice. I'm an ecotherapist and offer nature-based therapy, and I'm just excited to be here today. I am wondering, as people come in, is there any way that we can see people's faces? It's very difficult for me to talk when I feel like I'm just talking to cameras or a blank screen. Thank you. That even helps. It orients me more to see people's faces. Oh, there we go. Great. So we're going to ask that people turn on their cameras if they're willing to. One of the reasons we're asking for that is that in talking about grief and the group today, we're hoping to give a little bit of an experience of what it's like to be able to bring our feelings and talk about them into a group space. So we're trying to create a more intimate environment. So I know for me, it would be helpful if you are willing to turn on your camera to turn on your camera. And if you don't, then we will just trust that you have your reasons for doing that. Just a little bit about how today is going to go. We're going to start, or I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about grief and the place that grief holds in our feelings regarding climate. Sorry, I just saw that somebody's eating their lunch right now. Totally get it. We're over the lunch hour. So, so I'm going to just talk a little bit about grief, and then we're going to do a poll and break out into groups to have kind of a group experience of what it's like to talk about grief within a group setting. And then we're going to do a little bit of talk about the Climate Exchange, which is the group that Gillian and I run, just a little bit of education around what that group looks like, as well as our own personal experience of that group. We're also going to then do another just kind of experiential activity and break up into small groups once again, and then kind of come back together at the end. We're hoping to leave time at the end for questions, comments, anything like that. So if you do have questions or comments, you can put it in the chat, but I've asked to not see the chat just because as a presenter, it's very difficult for me. I'm so easily distracted. So I know that I would get off course. So also we'll just leave time at the end so that if you have questions or comments to, so that we can have a conversation and a discussion. Okay. All right. Well, let's get started. So when I was thinking about how I wanted to enter into the conversation today around grief and making space for our feelings regarding our climate crisis, I noticed every attempt to start the conversation, I felt very defensive of like, this is why we have to grieve and this is why it's important, and feeling very passionate about that. And I kind of stopped and I'm like, where's this coming from? Like, why do you feel like a lawyer, like you're defending grief or something? And I think part of it is just from my experience of being a therapist and also just kind of seeing what's in the culture right now, that there does appear to be an avoidance of wanting to go there, so to speak. And I noticed as a therapist, and I feel like this is happening more often now than it was when I first entered into the profession, that I almost have to try to convince people why uncomfortable feelings are important. And so I am kind of laughing to myself because I realize that everybody here is showing up to a talk on grief on a Sunday. So I probably don't need to defend grieving to all of you, but I still for myself thought it might be a great way to enter into this conversation. So I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about grief. So William Blake said, "The deeper the sorrow, the greater the joy." I think we've forgotten that. And I think as a culture, we have forgotten that we need to grieve. And even maybe more importantly than that, I think we have forgotten how to grieve. When we shut down grief, we also shut down joy. It's kind of like feelings are that way. I always tell my clients, like, you can't pick and choose what feelings you want. They're kind of a whole package deal. And in order to oftentimes get to those true places of joy, we have to go through those thresholds. And grief is kind of a threshold emotion into that initiation of being able to move through that so we can get to places of joy. When we don't grieve, we start to live in a flatlined society where we depend on outside stimulation and stimulants to give us a feeling of being alive. And so Francis Weller refers to that as secondary satisfactions. So I would say we have a lot of secondary satisfactions that we depend on now to give us a feeling of aliveness, whether that's buying things, getting dopamine hits on getting liked on Facebook, Netflix. I mean, we just have all of these outlets now. But what we're really missing is these primary satisfactions, which is a deep connection to ourself, a deep connection to the people we love, a deep connection to our community, to our land, to animals, all of it. So we're suffering from a little bit of amnesia and anesthesia right now in the culture regarding grief. So if we want to experience true joy, we have to genuinely experience grief. Many people don't want to feel that kind of pain, which I understand. It's not fun. It's not comfortable. And I would say that we have greatly been helped out by a culture that tells us that we should never be uncomfortable, that we should never feel pain, and that if we do feel pain, it's mostly likely our fault, that it's pathological on some level, and that we need to fix it immediately. Adam Phillips, who is a psychoanalyst that I love out of the UK, says that historically, oh, thank you for moving that. Historically, the pressure from society was to be good, but now we have moved to a pressure to be happy. So there's a real pressure on that. And so there's not a lot of place for grief in that kind of pressure. I shared with Gillian a story. I don't know how many of you saw the movie Don't Look Up, but I had to get a chuckle at one point in the movie. There's a person who's supposed to be kind of a Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg kind of amalgamation of a, tech billionaire. And he's introducing his new latest, phone. And this phone now can pick up your feelings. So it just can read your feelings. And so when he's demoing this phone, it reads his feelings as sad. It immediately shows him a cute, funny animal video, and then immediately schedules an appointment with his therapist. And as a therapist, I was horrified by this scene because that is not at all what therapy is, nor what therapy does. if somebody who is depressed shows up at my office, my job is not to distract them and attempt to cheer them up. And most of the time, by the time people get to my office, they've already had, albeit well-intentioned, worried family and friends already attempt that. And a lot of times the individual ends up feeling worse because they just don't feel better. And so my job is not to, as this demo in Don't Look Up, is not to distract people and to cheer them up. And perhaps it might be counterintuitive, but my job is to actually help people face the reality of pain that they're in, not to evade it. So one of the ways that I would describe this is that depression is kind of emotional constipation. When we talk about unmetabolized feelings, the person is stopped up. It's like they can't allow the feeling of grief or anger or fear to move through them because those feelings are movable feelings. When we are depressed, clinically speaking, we are stopped up. We're not engaging with those feelings any longer. And so my job is to help people move into a place where they can experience those feelings. What I would say the other side of that, which I see even more in our society right now, is what we refer to in psychoanalysis as a manic defense. And a manic defense is using avoidance and denial or overactivity to keep out the pain. So the emotional pain is drowned out by the compulsive activity. So how many people in here have felt guilty because they're not being productive enough? They should be doing, like, yes. And I think even more so, and I used to tell my clients this was before COVID, that we were almost as a society, it felt like moving at a manic pace. Like everything just felt like the dial got turned up and we were just on this high speed highway moving at the speed of light. Well, my argument is that's one of the ways that we're keeping out some of the pain that we're experiencing. And for this talk, I'm talking about with regards to our climate crisis. Now, here's the thing. Now, I'm in praise of feeling the feelings because I know that that's necessary. And it's also the only way for us to truly feel alive. But there's also some real dangerous consequences if we don't metabolize the grief that we're experiencing. So Freud, one of my, the forefathers of therapy, said, unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and they will come forth later in uglier ways. Another quote, Malidoma said, you cannot trust a man who cannot grieve, for he becomes a powder keg in the community. Okay, let's just look out into our world currently. Let's look at even just these last few years with COVID, which for many of us may believe that that also is interconnected to the climate crisis. And look at what we've lost. Look at the amount of loss we've experienced. Not just in lives, which is huge, but also just in rituals that we shared together, time together, jobs, housing. I mean, there's been so much loss. When you look out into our society right now, how many of you see anger at this like boiling point? Like people's anger is right there at the top, which is what happens to unmetabolized grief. It turns into that. There are people who say that war is actually just unmetabolized grief. And so we're kind of at this fever pitch right now because we are not actually grieving what is happening. So there's a guy that I really that is very famous. He's a trauma expert, Don Siegel, and he says a saying that we have to name it to tame it. So we have to name the feeling in order to, have some understanding of it. So for all of us who are here today, we've got a big job ahead of us. There's a Mount Everest ahead of us, because not only are we not naming this grief, but I think we are not naming ecological grief. So Francis Weller talks about that there's actually 5 gates of grief. And we're going to put up the 5 gates so you could see them. So Francis Weller talks about 5 gates of grief. And this is what I'm talking about. We need to name it to tame it, because he says the only actual gate of grief that we even barely acknowledge in our culture is gate number 1, which is the sorrow of losing someone or something we love. So that would obviously include the death of loved ones, but that could also include the ending of a relationship, or the death of a pet. So that one, we have really lost a lot of communal spaces to even do that kind of work around gate number 1. But back to the name it to tame it, he says that there's 4 other gates of grief that we're not actually even talking about or naming as a society. So gate number 2 is the places in us that have not known love, which I could talk about a lot, but we're not here today for that. So gate number 3, which is where I would put the ecological crisis, is the sorrows of the world. Gate 4, which I'll talk briefly about because I do think it has a big part of this, is what we expected and did not receive. And what he means by that is the grief where in our bones, we are expecting to be met by a village or a tribe of a small, close-knit group of people who are there meeting our eyes every morning, who are deeply listening to us, where we have regular ritual and ceremony with. So it's almost like the memories that live in our body from our ancestors that are no longer in modern day living. I would also put in there the disconnect between ourselves and nature as in there. Because I see as an ecotherapist, part of our dis-ease is a huge disconnect from nature. And what we are connected to, we protect, which is why one of the reasons we're in the crisis we are. And the last gate is ancestral grief. And I could do a long talk about that too, but he means that in 2 ways. One is just the ancestral trauma that each of our ancestors, what they did and what they had to live through to carry the spark and pass it on to us to get here today. But he's also speaking of the ancestral grief that we have in our country around the genocide of Native Americans and the slavery of African Americans that the culture still has not fully metabolized and won't see. And I think we see that even in the anger piece again, even some of the arguments we're having right now about how to discuss race more communally. I think part of that is the unmetabolized grief. So one of the things he says that we need to do with that is he says we need to pay attention to our soul hygiene. And he talks about that we do a lot of work around our emotional hygiene, we brush our teeth, we do physical hygiene, but he says that we need to pay attention to our soul hygiene. And that includes a regular practice with grief. And that this helps us maintain a relationship with ourselves and to the world around us. And that when we don't have that, we feel a sense of isolation and disconnection. But this is something, while some of these practices can be done alone, it is my belief, and one of the reasons I started this group with Gillian, that this is too big to do and hold alone. And we're up against that too, because in this culture, we have a lot of this kind of rugged individualism. If you need anything, if you lean into anything, you're weak. You need to, you know, feel that alone. And we no longer have those spaces, which is very new to the human species, to not have these ceremonies in place to help us move through this grief. And so we're going to talk a little bit more later about other things that you can do, but I just want to emphasize that I believe this has to be done. We have to create communal practices because it's too much to hold alone. And I think, unfortunately, because we're in this individual place, back to what I said, that the pathology then ends up being diagnosed to the individual as opposed to the society, which is where the diagnosis belongs. So we end up feeling like we're just not doing it. Everybody else has it figured out. They obviously can get their shit together, excuse my French. It's just me who can't. And that's a lie. So we have to do this together. And when we can do that together, and when we can have that inner balance, it allows us to be fully engaged with everything that is in front of us, all the feelings we have. I always remind my clients too that to be regulated is not to be calm. It's just to be fully engaged with whatever feelings you're experiencing in that moment. And when we're in balance more, then we can hold both the celebration of what our world is, as well as the mourning. And that's the grief and the joy. Does anybody have any questions before I move into the next part? Does anybody have any questions or comments around what I just said? Okay, well, we're gonna move on to we're gonna do a little bit of a poll and experience, just so that you can have an experience of what it might be like to be able to share your grief with others. So there's lots of different models out there for grief. I chose Kubler-Ross because it's probably the most well-known. Are most people familiar, have heard of the stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So one of the things that I want to preface this is there has been a little bit of misunderstanding about this cycle. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross never intended this to be prescriptive. Her awareness of this cycle was that this is what the person who was dying typically went through. But also I want to stress that this was also never intended to put messy feelings into neat little categories, nor was it intended to be a linear process that you're supposed to move through in a linear fashion. It's just an idea of what a lot of folks who were facing their own mortality moved through, and some of the different feelings that they had. So what we want you to do, we're just kind of using this as a frame for a discussion, but we have a poll. Okay, so the question is, as you look at the Kubler-Ross cycle, and you see kind of the definitions of each one. And I don't see this because this one isn't for climate change. If I had to put the climate change one in bargaining, and I would add guilt in there, like if you're feeling really guilty all the time, or I'm not doing enough, things like that would be in bargaining. But if you had to plot yourself in one of the stages of grief today, where do you feel you're at in this moment? Because the other important part of the Kubler-Ross cycle was that, again, back to the it's not a linear stage, that you can be in different stages at different times and when you receive different kinds of information. But just as today, where would you put yourself? Has everybody answered? Okay. The next question is, if you had to plot the United States or society, If society or United States was a person, where would you plot the greater society? What stage do you think we're in? Yeah. Okay.
That was quick.
Thank you. That one was a lot faster. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to send you into breakout rooms. You're going to have 10 minutes, and we just want you to have a conversation with the people in your group around where you find yourself, why you put yourself in the area that you did, and why you put society in the area that you did, and just have a conversation around your feelings of where you're at, as well as where you see the greater collective at. Does anybody have any questions about the breakout? Okay, and there'll be a timer there, so when there's 60 seconds left and you're coming back, it'll let you know. Okay? All right, we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. What? That was okay.
That was
Is it okay?
Oh yeah, it was great.
Good. Thanks for.
Oh, what? Oh, I see. Okay, but so it gave them a 60-second timer from that. So I guess they got 11 minutes. That's okay.
Recording.
Oh, are we back?
All right, welcome back, everybody.
Hey,
Still
welcome
waiting on
back.
a few more.
Yeah, we'll just let the rest of the groups trickle back in. Okay, well, before we move to the next portion, I just wanted to check in and see what that was like for people. If any, oh, we still have people trickling in. Just wondering if anybody would like to share anything from their small group experience with the larger group. What was that like for folks?
I think it was good to break down. Oftentimes we do these presentations and we just are kind of lectured to or given information. And I think it's helpful for all of us to do some sharing and supportiveness in smaller groups. So I think that was valuable.
Thank you, Dawn. I know that Gillian and I are going to talk a little bit about our own experience in groups, but I always, one of my sayings is like, anything is more manageable together. If you can talk about it, it just feels much more manageable together. Anybody else want to share their experience of talking about their grief in group?
I'd like to. I guess this, and I don't mean to take up a lot of time, but sometimes it's hard to articulate your feelings. But we were just talking about how you mentioned the analog of digestion to emotions, and that's personally something that I really have been picking up on. So we were talking about, I don't know, you can understand something logically, like we understand logically we can't save the world. And that's one of my revelations lately. I've been, I don't want to say I've had heroism, but I put too much weight on myself. Like, I should be able to change the world. I should be able to do all these things. And I finally realized, no, you can't. And you can know that logically, but until you're able to digest that, and I don't know how you magically just digest things or not, but it makes a huge difference. And we were talking about that, I guess that's my point.
That's so good. Thank you for naming that, Michelle, because I know that's one of my own experiences of coming to my awakening of what was happening. Was like, I always knew this on a very cerebral level, but it was through, I'm an avid backpacker in backcountry, and it was through an experience of being in wildfire that like I knew it in my body. And that's a very different experience than just knowing it up here. And certainly the group process helps know it in your body when you can feel contained and held by more than just yourself. So thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else? Such good comments.
It was great just to be able to talk and listen to each other instead of being, so isolated or task oriented.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, the task oriented piece we're going to talk about in just a second too. So I'm glad you brought that up. We'll write that down. Yes. Very important. Very important.
Well, does anybody have anything else before we move on?
Oh, just wanted to say that everybody was at a different place with it, and probably has been at all the other places that, other people have been in. And so it really creates some hope that, you won't always be in this stage of things. This is a moment and a snapshot of your experience. You haven't always felt this way, and you won't always feel this way. And you'll be at another stage. It might be one that is more hopeful, or it might be one that's less angry, or it might be one that is less sad or, fearful, and so, being able to know that other people are at other stages just reminds you that you've been at other stages too, and you will be at other stages.
Yeah, just like Megan said, it's not a linear process through grief, and you move around through different emotions, and they're all important. It's a big spectrum, and you have to feel them all. Yeah.
But also, I just want to say thank you for saying that too, Sherry, because I think that's our fear sometimes, right? Is that if I allow myself to really engage with the despair I feel, I'm never going to come out of it. It's just, I'm going to drown in it. And I think it's such a good reminder of like, no feeling lasts forever. If you think about your feelings, like you've never been angry forever, sad forever, like this too shall pass. If you allow it to, otherwise it just gets stopped up, so that's part of allowing it to kind of move through you. But with climate crisis, what I'm advocating is there's a book that talks about climate crisis as a hyper object. Like it's almost so big and so massive, we just can't wrap our heads around it. Like it's just, it's something unknown to us because we've never faced anything this massive, and you can't do that alone. I mean, I could barely grieve the death of my dog alone, let alone the changing planet. So I mean, we have to be held together to know that we can move through that. So thank you for saying that.
There's many things right now.
Yeah.
Which one should we choose?
Right. Yes. Multi crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, can I ask? Thank you. So I just want to revisit when you said no feeling lasts forever. Well, I want to believe that my positive feelings do. I think I'll always love my children. So do you want to modify that at all?
No. I don't. I will let you no. Good. That was good. Thank you for the comic relief. I don't know if you intended it that way, but Yes. I have a complicated relationship with everybody I love. Maybe it's just me. Okay, well, I think just for time's sake, we're gonna move on. And again, we'll have another breakout group, and at the end, hopefully we'll have more time too, if not everybody got to speak. So, but I'm gonna pass the torch to Gillian.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I think that it's so valuable to just take the time to talk to one another and be with each other. So now I think we'll just discuss briefly kind of our experience with the group we created. So in the vein of creating a communal space like Megan was talking about, she and I came together, oh gosh, maybe a year and a half ago now, and started a group and started formulating what would come to be called the Climate Exchange. And it is really just exactly that. It's a group space to be able to talk about our feelings around the climate crisis in ways that are deeper and more vulnerable than we're often allowed to go in society, than is polite in society. I kind of have a knee-jerk reaction often to keep things light and surface level for the sake of others. And I just really craved a space where I didn't have to do that. So we came together and created it. What I will say is my kind of initial instinct, the reason I came to want to start a group like this was because a friend of mine said, anxiety causes avoidance. And she said it in the way that I ignore my inbox sometimes. And so she was trying to be helpful and getting me to check my emails more often. But I was thinking about it on kind of a grander scale, and it made me realize that despite working in very climate aware spaces, I wasn't truly engaging with the depth of my own feelings about the crisis, and especially the gate of grief number 4, I believe it was, about things that are expected and not received. The future that I had told myself that would be there for me and isn't. I had never really grieved the loss of that potential. And so another, I think, reason, something that I learned today, was possibly a manic defense, in that I wanted to have a group so that not only myself, but other people in the community could process this grief and work through these big feelings in order to be more available and have more capacity to make change and to engage in action. But I guess kind of through my own experience with the group, it's become so much more personal, and my own journey, rather than impacting others and changing how they feel, and waking them up, which is kind of where I started. So I think it's just gotten much deeper for me and much more meaningful. And in that sense, it seems more important for other people to engage with this work, but when they're ready. I started out as a crusade, and Michelle, exactly like you said, like with my hero cape on, gonna change the world. But it's not that anymore. I think in our actual group sessions, I came to realize that I was expanding my window of tolerance for big, uncomfortable feelings and sitting in it. And I think another one of my defense mechanisms is to avoid things and to engage in escapism. I'll watch movies on Netflix and just not really, I won't click on news titles that are clearly around the climate because, I already know it. I'm not going to deal with it. It's too scary. I'll talk about it later. Somebody will tell me, I'm sure, but I can't. I'm going to go watch Netflix. And since being in group, I've had more space and availability to engage with those news articles, and it's helped me to be more informed on the science, which is that's complicated. I have complicated feelings about that, about being more informed, but I think it's been a really beneficial experience, and I'm really grateful for the space that we created.
Me too. Just a little bit, so Gillian had actually, this was the dream child of hers. She had actually wanted to start this group and had just done a reach out on a Facebook page for Omaha therapists, just to see if there's any mental health providers out there who were considered themselves climate aware therapists or eco-therapists. And so so I responded that I was, and the more we got to talk, recognized selfishly that I really was longing for a group myself to be able to talk about some of these things. I really identify with what Gillian said. I feel like in a lot of areas of my life, I have to say things, but before I say them, I wrap them up a couple times in bubble wrap and make sure that it's okay. And I really just wanted to be able to freely speak about what I was really feeling with other people. And so we spent almost a year and a half just preparing to start the group. We did a lot of research on already established group frameworks like the Good Grief Network that has kind of a 10-step, I think it's 10-step, it's almost based on the AA model. I attended some climate cafes, which were great, but ultimately what we came to was this longing to be with other people in our community, because I was a part of a lot of groups that were online, which have been invaluable to me. I don't know if I could be here doing the work had I not had them, but also I just craved being with people in my own community. Outside, like seeing people in person, like being out on the land together, and just creating a container to be able to not, the container was important, but what we ultimately came to is not to keep the group very structured, so that whatever needed to emerge out of the group could. And so we really allowed the group to move through whatever we needed to move through without trying to dictate that too much. And what we found is most people who showed up to the group were so hungry and desperate for that time that we didn't need structure, because people just needed an outlet to be able to connect with one another and not feel so isolated in this. I hope this sounds like a great advertisement for the group, and that you'll sign up for our second cohort, which we're doing this spring. We decided to take the winter off just because we realized that being outside was a really important co-therapist, I'd say. That's what I say in my nature-based therapy, that nature plays my co-therapist. And I think that was just an extra holding to be outside in nature and having those experiences together. So we're hoping to start our next cohort this spring. So if you have any interest, we'll talk at the end about how you can sign up for that.
Yep. And I think that was all I really wanted to say about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And if people have questions about the group at the end, we can answer them too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this next piece, one of the things that was so interesting, and I think that oftentimes, again, we're told that like to engage with hard feelings is miserable and you don't want to do that. But I mean, as hard as the things we were talking about, all of us every week couldn't wait to get to group. It was like the highlight of our week. We were like, yay, it's group, even though we were talking about really tough things and feeling really unbearable emotions. But again, back to what we were talking about earlier, and as I think Dawn highlighted, that anything is more manageable together. It just felt so much more manageable when I could know that that group was going to be there for me to talk openly. So we wanted to give you a little bit of an experience of some of the things we did in group. One of the goals of group was just to be able to grow our window of tolerance, to be able to sit and face harsh realities, but not feel alone in that. And so we're going to do another exercise that Gillian is going to describe. And then we're going to do one more small group breakouts where you can discuss your experience of what just happened. Okay. So do we want to put up the screen?
Oh yeah, we probably should.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. A little slow on the technology. Okay. So the credit to this exercise goes to Nick Totten. This is not my own, but something that I have shamelessly taken. And I hope that it'll be a useful exercise for us here. So I'm going to make a brief statement. This statement seems to me and to many who have explored the situation to be the probable outlook for the future. It is a middle of the road estimation of what might come to pass. So there's the probability that things could be much better than this scenario or much worse, but those would be outliers. I'm going to say a few sentences. I will then repeat the same sentences again. I am going to try for myself to remain present during the exercise and observe my feelings and reactions, and I will ask you to do the same. I invite you to scan your body and notice your responses on every level. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, impulses. There's no right response. This exercise is instead a practice of noticing and accepting how you do respond. Perhaps you'll avoid the statement and drift off, or maybe you'll look for holes or fallacies in the words I use. Notice if you become physically tense or forget what we're doing here. Whatever your response, it's okay. It's just useful to bring it into your awareness. This is also the time for me to say, it's okay if you want to mute me and not hear the upcoming statement. I don't want to inflict any discomfort against your will. Okay, so I'll say this twice and do my best to stay present and observe. Within a human lifetime from the present, our planet will suffer irreversible, catastrophic environmental wounding. Large areas of the Earth will become uninhabitable by humans and other species. Our current civilization will be severely damaged and possibly destroyed altogether. Many millions of humans and many billions of other than human beings will die prematurely. This mass extinction event has already begun. Yeah. Take a moment, process. I noticed for myself that my heart rate has gone up. I'm feeling anxious and afraid. I think I'm also nervous because I'm reading in front of a group of people.
Where do you feel the anxious and fear in your body?
It's a tightness in my chest.
Okay.
Okay.
We're going to do it one more time.
I'll read this again and note any differences between the first time and the second. Within a human lifetime from the present, that is, children who are alive today, our planet will suffer irreversible, catastrophic environmental wounding. Large areas of the Earth will become uninhabitable by humans and other species. Our current civilization will be severely damaged and possibly destroyed altogether. Many millions of humans and many billions of other than human beings will die prematurely. This mass extinction event has already begun. Note how you feel. I recommend breathing, highly recommend breathing. Breathing is great.
Breathing is good. What did you notice the second time?
Similar feelings, but I think I got, it became more real. I envisioned the places of the Earth that are going to become uninhabitable, and what that means, what that looks like. There's a lot of visioning. You?
Yeah, I'm tensing my legs and like my whole body is like a little tight fist right now. I've been through this exercise many times. I will say the first time I went through it, I was focused mainly on trying to absorb the information, and the second time I heard it, I just cried. So we're going to give you a chance now to break out into small groups again and just talk about what that was like for you and what your experience was. And again, I want to remind people that there's no right or wrong reaction. If we're looking at a diverse ecosystem, every being, every function has a role. So no matter what your experience was, there's a reason for that and a role to it within the collective. So, but we just want to give you a time to share with each other what that was like. So maybe go around and talk about your first go through and your second, what you noticed. Okay. And then we'll meet back here in 10 minutes.
Thanks, everybody. We just have a couple of slides left. We wanted to provide some resources, things that we know are helpful.
Well, I just wanted to mention before we move into resources too, as Gillian, it prompted something that I've been thinking about, which is one of the things that I really love, but also have been complaining about, is this inundation of resources. So I'm kind of laughing as we go to resources because as a therapist, I'm constantly sent articles, certifications, all of these things, you know, books, like just the amount of resources. And I tend to, while some of them have been very helpful, it also can feel paralyzing. And one of the ways that I started to see my own manic defense was like, oh, if I just get all these resources, then I'll know what to do. Or that somebody out there knows what we should be doing right now. And I think one of the great changes that we are facing is that we are in the darkness right now together. Nobody knows quite what to do. We have multiple crises facing us. And but one of the things when I was thinking about, okay, because in my office on the wall, I have a picture of Persephone in the underworld, if you're familiar with that myth, and why she goes down to the underworld for half the year, which also explains why we have our seasons of fall and winter. But in the underworld, we can't see, you know, we're kind of feeling our way through the darkness together. But one of the things that I was reminding myself about was just because we're in the darkness doesn't mean that everything we encounter will be dark. Carl Jung has the concept of the shadow. It's our unconscious. It's everything that we find unacceptable about ourselves. And there's certainly some universality to the shadow, like maybe greed or envy. I mean, most of us can agree that those aren't, you know, attractive qualities that we like to admit that we have. But also one of the things I remembered was that he said sometimes our most gold, our most beautiful aspects go into our shadow. If we grow up in a family that doesn't touch and we're a touchy-feely person, touch could go into our shadow. If we grow up in a family that prizes intellect and academics and we're an artist, you know, creativity could go into our shadow. And so one of the things I was reminding myself is that we might encounter gold in the darkness too. And even for myself, looking at what COVID, even though it's been a dark time for us as a world, so many people I know, including myself, have had awakenings during this time of what really matters and how we were living and how we don't want to go back to that and how we need to change things. And for me, that's the gold right there. And so I guess I just wanted to say that I know that we're trying to all figure this out together. But I also believe that not everything we will encounter necessarily will be dark. So, and I think just that talking about what it's like to push yourself to show up today and just the level of community and feeling of connectedness, again, that how that can shift how we feel in this world as we move through it together. So just have so much appreciation and gratitude for everybody showing up, which is the other side of grief, is gratitude. So we're going to talk about some resources. You know, we just wanted to give some ideas going forward for folks. I mean, obviously the daily practices, that's that soul hygiene that Francis Weller talks about, of just like, what are we doing in our own personal lives to allow ourselves to kind of feel that grief. You know, I know for me, it looks like allowing myself to go to the woods and walk through and cry if I need to. And interestingly enough, most of the time by the end of the walk, I feel better and I'm noticing everything that's so beautiful around me. It does let me move into that joy and appreciation. And one of the things that happens when you allow grief to touch you and you allow it to absorb is that not only are you present, but it allows every moment to be precious too. So really kind of looking at your own life and where you could do some daily practices of just allowing yourself to acknowledge, back to that name it to tame it, of what you're feeling and how to get in touch with that. obviously, I hope we did our job by people having experiences in groups today. Join a group. I mean, it has been just so helpful to me. I'm in many groups that hold me. I don't think I could do the work I do without being held in that way. So, and our group is one group, that's a local group, but there's a lot of different groups happening out there nationally and internationally. So the Good Grief Network is one of them. There's a lot of different climate cafes out there that you can join. Those tend to be more just drop-ins if you want a group where you can just drop in and not have to make a commitment to showing up every week. You know, if you feel that you are in a place where you're stopped up and may need somebody to help facilitate that, there are definitely climate aware mental health providers out there. And I linked to the Climate Psychology Alliance, which I'm actually a member of in the Midwest Regional coordinator for. We have a website that has different coaches and therapists who are climate aware. And then the Deep Adaptation, which is a movement, has a guides page. So if you just Google Deep Adaptation Guides, they also have coaches and therapists listed that you can talk to about these feelings. And I know that's important for some people. There's still, you know, therapists are people too. We're not, unfortunately, what's the word I'm looking for? We still can be in denial. And so I know for some folks who have tried to access therapy to talk about some of these, they have felt pathologized as if they're catastrophizing or, you know, so sometimes knowing that somebody already understands and gets it so that you can just get to talk can be helpful. And then lastly, you know, I know we've talked about keeping busy, but what we know about trauma, which I don't have enough time to talk about, just the trauma of living through an ecological crisis, but also just what's happened and having a real society of traumatized people, we know that movement can help trauma. You know, when people can't, when people feel paralyzed or alone in that, it can exacerbate the symptoms. And we know that if people can feel like they're doing something to make a difference, even on a small scale, that can be really helpful. So, and I always say, like, whatever you're already passionate about, the climate fits into that. So, I mean, you don't even have to go out and start a new thing if you don't want to. It's like, how can you even get those conversations going in your already established groups as well? Do you have anything to add to resources?
No, I think that's it. Megan touched on something briefly about resources, and it's something that I feel a little bit defensive about because I am not a mental health professional. I know we've got very little time left, but I remind myself often that my gift is my presence. You don't have to be a mental health professional to sit with someone in grief. So ultimately, above all, what we recommend is just to connect with one another.
Thank you for saying that, because that's so important. You do not need a degree. What we need is people to deeply listen to us and to openly share our sorrow together. I mean, it doesn't, there are situations where a clinician can come in handy, but I also think that we can almost, and there's not enough of us to be out there to help everybody. So I think, again, a group of really committed people together, deeply listening to each other, can have amazing outcomes. So, all right, well, we have about, how many minutes do we have?
6 minutes.
We have 6 minutes. So we're gonna open it up to the floor just to see if anybody has any last final thoughts, questions, comments.
I'd just like to say a big thank you. I'll express my gratitude to our leaders, facilitators, for taking the time to put all this together, but for having the heart and the compassion to present it and to look out for others in the world. So thank you. And thank you to everybody for being here. I would offer 2 or maybe 3 additional suggestions for resources. One is the exceptional, majestic Fontenelle Forest. That is a good place to go to get connected to nature, where nature can help to heal us. And then any of the pets that we have around us or other support groups nature is there to help us. It isn't just a burden that we have to look out for. And the other thing is laughter. We can put as much laughter in our lives as we can, and joy, because I think self-care is the most important, and laughter is the best medicine. Thank you.
Well, thank you for, those were such excellent. And as you were talking, I was laughing because when you mentioned Fontenelle, I said, oh yeah, a lot of those trails have a lot of my tears. And I thought, and a lot of my laughter. And then you said it. So I was like, yes, perfect. Perfect.
Thank you so much, John.
And for those people that want to get involved, Green Bellevue is putting together next year's Earth Day. So if anybody wants, I tend to take my frustration out and put her energy into action. So if you want to get involved, we can connect you, and we do have activities where you can get constructive for the earth.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I have, this is not a quick question. So if you feel like this is not the place to answer this question, but that idea of providing a sense of community for people, and that everybody's at different stages. People who are in denial about climate change, feel like us to be dangerous and the problem, right? But if we are really embracing that people are at different stages, and that denial is something that we also need to be compassionate about and accept, and that we won't connect, unless we start to develop a place of connection and compassion for people who that initial response is that oh gosh, they're dangerous because they are part of the problem. So I don't know if you have any quick words about that. That seems like kind of a paradox. Sorry.
I love that question, Sherry. And I think many of us, I know for myself, I struggle with that all the time. And I have to remind myself back to like the complex ecosystem of every response has a purpose and a place. And denial is one of those. And a lot of times we have to keep in mind, like, denial sometimes is how we help, it helps titrate the information we're absorbing, because sometimes denial is letting us know it's too much, like we can't take it all in. I have found that when I am with people who are actively in denial, I go back to deep listening. And something that, this is something that I think her name's Catherine Cahoe. She's a climate scientist, talks about is, most of the time in conversations, you can find what people care about. If they're talking about, oh gosh, I really wanted to go skiing and there's no snow this year, or somebody who fishes and the fish are running out, like, can you find ways that they already feel connected to help kind of get in there to talk a little bit about how that affects the things that they are passionate about. Because one of the things Dawn brought up about the forest, and that's something I always tell my clients and why I do some nature-based therapy, is that people protect what they feel connected to. I mean, that's one of the reasons the Native Americans were such good stewards of the land, because they did not see the land as separate from themselves. If the land is harmed, they are harmed. So how can we help, move people into ways that they already feel connected? But I also think that some people just aren't going to be there. And one of the reasons I started the group too, is I struggled with how much I should push, but also I found those conversations highly unsatisfying for me, because I really didn't want to be in a place where I had to feel like I was trying to, wrestle people to the ground with this. And I could definitely find myself, depending on who I was talking to, in that position. So I'm not saying I'm free of that, because I've certainly done that. I don't know if you have anything, and I don't know if that answered your question, Sherry.
Yeah, I'm struggling myself in how to be not in my own silo, and because connecting with others to me is the key to everything. Yeah. And as a culture, to create a sense of connection between our differing groups of individuals who feel so differently. And so those cultural shifts are part of our healing too, perhaps. and are coming together with our grief.
Well, and I'll add one more thing that I always try to help myself stay reminded of is what I know about a therapist, because essentially when we are asking people, if you think about any social justice, whether that's racial justice, gender justice, planetary justice, like we're essentially asking people to expand and grow. And what environments and approaches allow for people to expand and grow? It's compassion, it's benevolence, it's respect. Essentially, it's love. And I know that's a hard place to come from, but if we want people to expand and grow, that if we come with shame and blame, people shut down and there's nowhere to go with that. And there's a lot of that going around right now. So regardless of when I'm entering into conversation, I always have to remember like the quality of my approach, because that oftentimes too can help steer the conversation too.
I have one point on your statement about Native Americans. I don't think you probably even realized it, but I believe you said it in the past tense. Native Americans are still.
Yes. Thank you for correcting that. If I did say past tense, I deeply apologize, but I appreciate you. Yes, I appreciate you correcting that, Nancy. Thank you. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Well, thank you again for being a part of it. I do think Gillian put in the chat
In the chat, there is the link to sign up to apply to be in the 2022 cohort of our group, the Climate Exchange. And I've also put the Deep Adaptation Guide. And that's the link to Climate Aware Therapists. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time today, for going through this journey with us, for doing the exercises. Just appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan and Jillian.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Michelle, was
you.
there anything else? I'm sorry.
Bye.
Yeah, that's all right. Just wanted to remind everybody about our next program. It is the second Sunday in February. So Katie posted the save the date in the chat as well. We're looking at sustainability in design for next month's program. So fashion design, housing design, whatever we can come up with. So join us next month. Also, we are, as Dawn mentioned, looking for volunteers for upcoming Sarpy County Earth Day. Steve, do you want to just quickly talk about how we're doing it this year, since it's a little different than years past?
Sarpy County Earth Day is going to be a multi-pronged approach. We have a passport like we did last year, where many things are remote. And you can earn points and prizes. We also will have a table at Earth Day Omaha, which is April 23rd. We will, and we're going to have a speaker series at some point. So, and recycling collections. So you'll be able to, hey, if you want to volunteer, I think somebody put up an email address, but you can email me at stevet@greenbellevue.org. If you want to take part, you can check our website out, greenbellevue.org, and yeah, hey, be a part of it. Put that depression, put that energy into changing the world.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for coming. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.